I don't know about you, but sometimes it's easy to sit there listening to a talk on a Sunday and feel a bit inadequate. Like everyone else, that you look around has got something figured out and you're the only one who hasn't, or that the person up the front is so much better at something that you're really struggling with. But actually, it isn't all those people that speak. It isn't until you speak yourself that you realize how wrong that is. Often the one up the front speaking about something is the one who's struggling the most with that thing and working through that thing themselves in their very lives. And that's the reason why God's put it on their heart to speak about. Or when you're given a subject to speak about sometimes, that's when you start having the problem with it, and God starts showing all these things up in your life. So that's what I want to talk about this morning, is what we do when it feels like God is not talking to us. Now, perhaps surprisingly, there's loads of stuff in the Bible about God being silent. There's loads of stuff about God speaking to people, and we've all, I'm sure, had experience of God speaking to us, but there's loads of stuff in the Bible about God seeming to ignore people or seeming to be silent. So I feel quite reassured it's not just me. Job is a classic one. Job 30, verse 20, I cry out to you, God, you don't answer. I stand up, you merely look at me. David even in Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you don't answer. By night, and I find no rest. And if you read the commentaries, the scholars talk about this period of about 400 years or so at the end of the New Testament, when the prophets finish before Jesus comes. It's about 400 years. And there's no record of God speaking to his people at all through a prophet. Having spoken for years and years and years through a series of prophets, suddenly, all of a sudden, he says nothing at all. But does that silence mean abandonment? Because there's loads of parts of the Bible, aren't there, where we're told that God will never abandon us. He will never forsake us. He's so intimately involved in our lives and creation that we have our breath and we live and we move within him. He's promised to be with us wherever we go, even to the end. That's not a God who ignores us, is it? So it comes back to the question, why does it sometimes feel like he has left us? Why does he sometimes feel like he's silent and is ignoring us? How do we reconcile that God who wants to be so intimately involved in our lives that he knows every hair on our head and gives us every breath, with a God who's silent and we kind of assume he's ignoring us? Well, the only way I can put those two together is that there's many reasons why we may think God is ignoring us when actually that isn't true. When he's just either being quiet or we can't hear him. So I just want to look at a few things which have come to my mind, and I've been led to some passages in the Bible over the past few weeks and months to kind of put some context around that. The first one is, maybe he's speaking, but there's something blocking me hearing his voice. Maybe he is saying something, and there's just something in the way. Psalm 66. Come and hear, all you who fear God. Let me tell you what he's done for me. I cried out to him with my mouth. His praise was on my tongue. If I'd cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But God has surely listened and heard my prayer. Praise be to God who has not rejected my prayer or withheld his love from me. Is there something in our lives? Is there some sin that we're holding on to in our hearts? Something we're refusing to let go of that acts as this block between us and God? He's speaking to us, but there's just something in the way. That's what the whole of the Old Testament's about, isn't it? Sin being this block in between man and God, and there's sacrifices and laws to try and kind of navigate a way around that. But we don't live in those times, do we? We live in the times of Jesus when we don't need to offer that sacrifice anymore. We just need to confess our sins, turn away, resolve to turn our back on those things, and that block has disappeared. So maybe that's the first thing. Maybe he's speaking, but actually there's just something he wants us to deal with first. The second one, and I think the one that was applying to me in the situation I've just spoken about, was maybe he seems silent because he's already spoken. Those of us who've got kids who are young and not so young, can you think of a time where they've asked you the same thing again and again and again, and you give the same answer again and again and again? Eventually, you come down to, I've told you the answer, just stop asking the question. How many times in my life, thinking back, I wonder, when I thought God's silent about something, and actually he's saying in love, I've already told you the answer, just stop asking me the question. That was my experience recently. He told me clearly what his will was, and yet I was still asking the same question. Sometimes that's obvious, sometimes I guess it's less obvious. Maybe he's given me the answer, and it's in the Bible, the place where his word is recorded, but I haven't spent long enough reading the Bible, I don't know the Bible well enough or looked enough. Don't misunderstand me, I don't think God's in the business of getting frustrated with us and saying, I've told you once, I'm not telling you again. I don't think that's the God of love. But sometimes we ask a question, and I guess if we're honest, certainly me, I can say for me, I know the answer, if I'm honest. I just don't necessarily want to hear what that answer is, so I ask the question again, hoping the answer will be just ever so slightly different, maybe. Maybe we've read it time and time again in the Bible, or we know a particular passage well, but we choose conveniently to forget it when God's telling us to go back to it. I think that's when God gently says to us, look, I've told you the answer. You know what I'm going to say. I've given you everything you need. Just go and do it. I don't know about you, but I know that I keep asking God about something sometimes when, if I'm honest, I already know the answer. I already know what he's telling me. I'd just rather it wasn't the case. I'd just rather that answer was different. Or is it just as it was in my case that he's told us what we need to do, but we just need to do that one thing before he tells us what else? We don't do it much more, do we? But do you remember in the days when we didn't have phones with maps in and we used to stop and ask people for directions? And maybe it's a man thing, maybe women are better at this, but turn right, then take the second left, then take the third right, and then turn right at the roundabout and go up the hill and turn left after the left turn. I'd be like, what way do I go first? Left, right? As much as I really honestly wish that God would tell me all his plans all at once, in advance, sometimes he just chooses to tell us the next step, and that's for our own good. It's not until we take that first step that he gives us the next instruction, because sometimes the whole thing might be just too much. So that's the second one. Maybe he's already told me the answer. The third one is maybe he is speaking to me, maybe he is speaking to us, but we aren't listening. That's a hard one. And I guess, if I'm honest, it's true sometimes that I ask God for guidance on something, but then I don't wait to hear his reply before I rush off and go and try and sort it out myself anyway. It's tempting, isn't it? And then it seems like God's not answering. Well, why didn't you answer the question? Well, because you've gone and done it anyway. Some of us will identify those scenarios more than others. I certainly do. What should I do, Lord? Okay, I'm just going to go and do this until you answer. Why won't you answer me, God? Okay, well, I'm just going to do this, and while I'm doing that, you can tell me what I should be doing. What should I do? Oh, no answer? Okay, well, I'll do it this way then. I ask God for guidance on something, but I just don't wait for the reply before I run off and sort it out myself anyway. But maybe he is answering, but I'm just so busy trying to do it my way that I can't hear him. Or perhaps the opposite. Perhaps we aren't moving at all. Perhaps he's telling us to do something and we're just sitting back there saying, please talk to me, God. And he's off in the distance saying, well, come on then, follow me. We're too far away to hear what he's trying to say to us. We're so far back on the path that he's trying to take us on, we lag behind and can't hear him so well. And I think that's probably linked to the number 4 as well. Maybe he is speaking, but there's just too much noise. It's a real big one these days, isn't it? There's just too much noise. 1 Kings 19, one of my favourite passages. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord for the Lord's about to pass by. And a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" We often speak, we use this phrase, don't we, the still small voice of God, the same phrase that's translated here in the NIV as a gentle whisper. God can and does speak in loud, obvious, unavoidable ways. He definitely has been to me over the past few months. The Bible talks about trumpet blasts, about mighty voices, thunderous roars, earthquakes, fires, mountains being shattered. But sometimes he chooses to whisper. Sometimes just to sit with us. To your point earlier on, he just wants us to whisper with him quietly in intimacy. And I don't know about you, but I find that probably hardest. Hearing a whisper, spending time in quiet at God's feet, in silence, is probably the hardest thing to do. Particularly when we're faced with a really difficult decision or a really busy time in our lives and we really, really need God's guidance. There is so much going on and so much noise that just sitting at his feet in silence is the hardest thing to do. So many conflicting demands in our time. We're so busy, there's so much to do. The doing gets in the way of the hearing. It's no wonder, is it, sometimes that we don't hear his voice? Maybe life is just so loud that we haven't got a chance of hearing him when he chooses to speak in a gentle whisper. Our minds are going so fast with the doing that we haven't got a chance of the being or the hearing. Just to sit, to listen, to wait, to hear. And then, of course, maybe he is speaking, but we just don't recognize his voice. God speaks to us in many, many different ways. I've experienced this recently, as I said. It was everything from people speaking on Sundays to Word for the Day, to Bible readings, to people talking to me, to articles in newspapers, to adverts on the tube. Sometimes he just shouts, and that's great. It gets through to me. Sometimes he speaks through the Bible. Sometimes he speaks through friends or teachers, bringing words, bringing a particular passage to life. Sometimes he speaks through songs, through drama. Sometimes he'll even speak through non-believers. Sometimes he speaks to us in here, through our spirit, guiding us, our conscience, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes he speaks through nature, through creation. Loads of different ways God can speak to us. Sometimes he can speak to us in new, creative, totally unexpected ways. I was really excited a couple of days ago. Naomi said, we've got this passage we're teaching to the kids today. It comes from Numbers 22. It's really odd. And I said, let's have a read. I don't know if you know the story. The kids are looking at Numbers 22. Ask them about it. If you've got kids, ask them about what they took away from the teaching today. I'll be really fascinated to know. It's about God speaking in a rather unexpected way to someone who wasn't just listening. So there's Balak. He's king of Moab, and he's terrified of the Israelites taking over his land. So he calls on the services of Balaam, who's known for his blessings and curses being effective. But Balaam is God's man, and he says to God, well, what should I do? Should I go and curse the Israelites like Balak wants me to? God says, no. So Balaam relays this message to the king Balak. But Balak's men keep coming at him again and again and again. So Balaam speaks to God again, and God says, well, okay, go with them, but you must listen very carefully to everything I tell you on the way. So Balaam leaves. And the inference is he doesn't listen carefully to God about every step of the way because God tries to get his attention. And Balaam starts doing things in his own way. So God sends an angel to speak to him. But Balaam's so intent in doing things in his own way, he doesn't see the angel. The donkey he's sitting on does see the angel and suddenly stops. And so Balaam gets off and starts whacking the donkey. This happens 2 or 3 times until eventually God takes extreme measures and the donkey starts talking to him. Let's face it, a God who can speak through a donkey can use new and different ways to speak to me if he wants to, and he does. Just as we on a human level use different ways to speak to people depending on where they are and what we have to say, so does God. We can communicate by text message, but there's some things that aren't appropriate to communicate by text message. There's some things we want to meet people face to face. There's some things we might share with people. We know that as human beings. How much more does God know that? Different methods of communication are appropriate at different times. God uses different ways to speak to us, depending on the circumstance, or perhaps depending on what he has to say. Just because he's spoken to us in one way before doesn't mean he's always going to speak to us in the same way. So perhaps if God is feeling like he's silent, maybe he's actually trying to speak to us in a different way. Maybe we just need to spend some time with him and ask him what he wants to say to us and how he's speaking to us. And the skill then, of course, is learning to recognize his voice, however it's delivered to us, is recognizing God. And we do that like we would do with any other human being. We learn to recognize someone's voice by spending time with them. If we want to give God the opportunity to speak through the Bible, no surprise, we actually need to read it. If we want to give him the chance to speak through music or through song, we need to engage in worship. If we want to give God the chance to engage with us and speak to us through a sermon, we need to put Facebook down. And then finally, maybe God sometimes does choose to be silent because he's just wanting us to desire him more. I'm guilty of sometimes only speaking to God when I want something, or I need something, or I'm going through difficult times. But he wants us to share every intimate detail of our lives with him. He wants us to be permanently connected to him. He wants us to desire him. I'm sure we've all noticed how it's not until we knock that a door is opened. It's not until we seek that we find. The Bible tells us it's the mourners who are comforted, it's the hungry that are fed, it's those who desire, who need, who want, who spend time with him. Maybe God isn't silent. Maybe he's just waiting for us to get a bit closer before he speaks to us. So coming back to that question that I posed at the beginning, is God ever silent? Yes, I think sometimes he is, because he wants us to be closer to him. But other times, maybe it just feels like he is. Maybe he's speaking to us, and we just can't hear, or there's something in the way, or he's trying to speak to us in a different way. But does he ever ignore us? No, absolutely not. I can't see that the ground curves as I look out through there, so the earth must be flat. Rubbish. I can't hear God speaking, so he must be ignoring me. Equally rubbish. Silence and abandonment are not the same thing. So next time I'm asking God about something and he doesn't seem to be answering, I'm going to resolve to kind of run through those things in my head. Is there anything blocking me from hearing his voice? Is there anything I need to deal with in my life so that I can hear him? Has he in fact already spoken? And I'm just asking the same question. Am I actually listening? Am I in the right place to hear him? Is there just too much noise going on? Do I just need a bit of quiet and stillness and peace? Is he speaking to me in a new or different way? Or does he just want me to spend some time with him, to desire him more, spend more time with him first, so that I can really hear what's on his heart? Thank you.